For 14 years, my husband's family believed I married for money. What they didn't know is that I had been quietly keeping their business alive, and that I had the paperwork to prove it. If you've ever stayed silent while someone rewrote your story just to keep the peace, you already understand why I didn't say anything. There was just one problem. They knew the truth before I realized they did. There is a bank statement in my kitchen drawer that is older than my marriage. For 9 years, I believed I was the only person who had ever read it. I was wrong. And when I found out who else had seen it, 14 years of my marriage rearranged themselves in a single afternoon. It isn't from my marriage. It's from the woman I was before it, a version of myself nobody in my husband's family ever actually met. I keep it behind the takeout menus, the kind of place you put something you don't want to think about but also can't bring yourself to throw away. Every few months, I take it out, read the number once, and put it back exactly where it was. Same corner, same fold. I've moved that folder twice. Once into our first apartment, once into this house. And both times, for half a second before I packed it, I told myself I should probably get rid of it. I never did. I always told myself I kept it for sentimental reasons. That's not quite true. Or, it's not the whole truth. I am, by profession and by personality, a meticulous person. So the number on that statement is exact, $341,212.40. Not large. Not impressive by the standards of anyone who actually has money. But in my husband's family, it would have been enough to end a story they've been telling about me for 14 years. I know that sounds dramatic. It wasn't. It was just paperwork, sitting in a drawer, doing absolutely nothing, while a version of my life that wasn't true got repeated at every dinner table I sat at. She's lucky to have him. A cousin told me once at my own wedding, like it was a compliment. I smiled. I always smiled at that one. It was easier than correcting it. Everett never said it quite that way, but I remember him once early on saying, "You don't have to fix everything, you know." I told him I knew. I didn't. Not really. If you've ever stayed quiet about something true because saying it out loud felt like keeping score, you already know exactly why I never showed anyone this statement. Have you ever kept proof in a drawer and still said nothing? What stopped you? My name is Sloan. This is the story of what that piece of paper cost me to keep hidden and what it finally proved in front of everyone on the night I stopped. Stay close. This one takes a little time to unfold. The week before the wedding, Everett's father raised a glass at his parents' table and said my name like it belonged there. Warren had a way of making toasts feel like verdicts, generous ones, that night. Everett's hand was on the small of my back. Verity smiled at me from across the table, and I remember thinking, this is what safety looks like. I was 22 and certain I had finally found the version of a family that didn't require apologizing for yourself. I want to be honest about something. That memory is real. I'm not telling you about it, so you'll feel sorry for who I used to be. I'm telling you because betrayal doesn't work without it. You can't be undone by people who never mattered. Here's the part that took me longer to see. I was the kind of woman who fixed things and then made sure no one had to notice I'd fixed them. If a bill ran late, I paid it before anyone had to be embarrassed. If the silence at dinner got too long, I filled it. Being needed felt safer than being known. I didn't call it a flaw. I called it being easy to love. 3 years in, at a Christmas dinner, Verity leaned toward another daughter-in-law and said, admiring, "Her family's always been so comfortable." She said the word comfortable like it was a virtue you were born with. I had just become a senior accountant that same month. Nobody asked. I told myself. She didn't mean anything by it. The following spring, I offered to split the cost of a family trip evenly between the siblings. Verity waved a hand. "Oh, let Everett handle that. Light. Easy." In front of his brothers. As if money and I were two things that shouldn't be left alone in a room together, despite the fact that I was, professionally, the only person at that table who'd ever balanced a real ledger. I told myself, she's old-fashioned about money. That's all. Then, the year Warren's business missed a loan payment, $22,000, due in 6 days, the kind of number that turns into a family emergency fast. I wired it from my own account before anyone had to ask out loud. I didn't tell Everett the exact amount. I didn't tell anyone. I just made it disappear, the way I'd been making small disasters disappear for years. I found out, 3 weeks later, what that disappearing act actually looked like from the outside. We always knew she had her hooks in something. I heard Verity tell a cousin, at a baby shower, half laughing. Probably Daddy's money. I was standing close enough to hear. Not close enough that she knew I had. My hands still went around a stack of paper plates. I didn't drop them. I just stood there, holding them, counting them without meaning to. 17 plates. I have no idea why I counted. I just did. I remember thinking, if I drop these, I'll have to explain why my hands are shaking. So I didn't drop them. That same week, the folder sat out on our kitchen counter. The old estate papers, the bank statement, all of it, left there while I was busy solving someone else's emergency instead of paying attention to my own. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't locked away yet. It was just sitting there, the way unimportant things sit out, waiting for nobody to notice them. Somebody noticed. But here's what I didn't see. What none of us saw. That folder didn't sit on that counter for one afternoon. It sat there for 4 days. And Verity was in our kitchen twice that week. Just helping, she said, bringing over a casserole dish, picking up a few things, being the kind of mother-in-law who lets herself in. I wouldn't understand what those 2 visits actually meant for 9 more years. By the time I did, the story about me had already hardened into family history. It started small enough that I almost missed it. At a family lunch that spring, a cousin touched my arm and said, "You're doing such a good job keeping things together, considering." She smiled when she said it. I smiled back. I didn't ask what. I told myself it was nothing, an awkward compliment, the kind people give when they don't know what else to say. A few weeks later, reorganizing the bookshelf in my home office, I noticed the old estate folder wasn't quite where I'd left it. Just an inch off the edge of the shelf. The corner of the bank statement sticking out slightly more than usual, like someone had pulled it partway and pushed it back in a hurry. I told myself I'd moved it myself and forgotten. People do that. I do that. I'm not always as exact as I think I am. I'm a meticulous person. I am always exactly as exact as I think I am. I didn't let myself finish that thought. I found out the truth by accident, the way most people find out the truth, not from someone confessing it, but from someone forgetting you were close enough to hear. I'd arrived early to a luncheon at Verity's house, a casserole dish in both hands, and the kitchen door was open about a foot. She was talking to a woman I didn't recognize, someone's new wife. Someone being introduced to the family the way I'd been introduced years ago at that same table. The girl Everett married, Verity was saying, and something in the way she said the girl made my stomach drop before I understood why. I stood very still in the doorway. I noticed the refrigerator humming. I noticed a chair leg scraping against tile somewhere behind her. I noticed everything except the words. For a second, the way you notice the room around a car accident before you let yourself look at the car. Then I let myself hear it. She had nothing when she married him. Verity said, warm, easy, like she was sharing something charming. We gave her everything she is now. I didn't put the casserole dish down. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, holding something warm, in a doorway, listening to a woman describe 14 years of my life as a story about her own generosity. I didn't correct her. I walked back to my car instead and sat with the dish still on my lap, engine off, for longer than I want to admit. Here's the part that actually broke something. Everett had been in the room next to that kitchen, close enough to hear. He said nothing. Not that day, not at dinner, not in the car on the way home. I didn't lose the Whitfields that week. I lost the version of the last 14 years I'd been quietly telling myself. Every rescue, every wired payment, every time I'd made something disappear so no one would have to feel small. Recalibrated, in one sentence, into something I'd apparently been given. That night, I drove home and sat in the driveway for 40 extra minutes before I could make myself go inside. Not because I was scared of the house, because the house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a place I'd been allowed to stay. I went and eventually, I made dinner. I don't remember what. I remember standing at the stove longer than the recipe required, just to have somewhere to put my hands. There was one thing I didn't discover until much later, not for years. Whether Verity actually believed what she'd said, or whether she'd known the truth the entire time and simply found the lie more useful. I started sleeping in the guest room about a week after the luncheon. I didn't announce it. I just started doing it the way you start doing a lot of things you haven't actually decided to do. One Sunday morning, 3 weeks in, I woke up and didn't move for a long time. Not because I was tired, because there wasn't anywhere I particularly wanted to be instead. I'd been sad for weeks before that. Sad has a shape. It moves, it comes in waves, it makes you cry in the car. This wasn't that. This was flatter, quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on the whole house and forgotten to turn it back up. I made coffee. I didn't drink. I sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug, not because it was cold, and watched the steam stop. I know that sounds dramatic. It wasn't. It was just Sunday. The trigger, when it came, wasn't dramatic either. That Tuesday, no. I won't say it was a Tuesday. It was a Wednesday, back at the office, reviewing a new client's books, and I caught a small embezzlement a junior colleague had missed by about $400 across 11 months. Easy to miss. Easy if you weren't looking exactly right. You always know what's really going on with the numbers, the colleague said, half in awe, packing up her bag. Even when people lie about them. She meant it as a compliment about spreadsheets. I sat with it longer than that. I have spent 14 years being exact about other people's truths. I had never once been exact about my own. That night I sat in the guest room with the light off and let myself think the thing all the way through, for the first time. I had spent 14 years trying to prove I wasn't what they said I was, instead of simply saying what I actually was. I kept the receipts of my own decency the way other people keep evidence of a crime they didn't commit. There is a difference between being modest and being erased, and somewhere along the way, I let people mistake one for the other for far too long. I am done auditioning for a family that already decided what I was before I walked in the door. I said it out loud, once, quietly, to an empty room. It sounded truer out loud than it had in my head. The next weekend, I went looking for the estate folder, not to read it again, just to know exactly where it was. It wasn't on the shelf. It took me 20 minutes to find it shoved at the back of the closet, behind a winter coat, corners gone soft from years of handling. I'd hidden it without ever deciding to hide it, filed away like contraband instead of proof. I held it for a while. I didn't open it. I just held it the way you hold something you're finally ready to stop being ashamed of. I didn't decide to confront anyone that night. That's not what changed. What changed was smaller and harder to explain. I decided I was done being generous as an audition. From now on, if I gave something, it would be because I chose to visible on the record with my name on it, not folded into a drawer where no one would ever have to thank me or doubt me again. I put the folder on my desk instead of the closet shelf. I left it there. I didn't lock the drawer. I didn't know it then, but that small decision would eventually demand a very public correction. 18 months passed. I'd like to tell you it was 18 months of confrontations and clean, satisfying scenes. It wasn't. It was mostly just Wednesdays, grocery runs, work, the unglamorous machinery of a person quietly putting her life back together one ordinary day at a time. I made a partner that spring. I bought a small house under my own name, not because the marriage was ending, but because I wanted one room in my life that nobody else had ever walked through first. I told Imogen everything, finally, the whole 14 years of it, sitting in her kitchen with 2 glasses of wine I barely touched. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just refilled my glass and said, "Okay, so now what?" Now, what turned out to be smaller than I expected. I went to family dinners again. I just stopped fixing things before anyone noticed they were broken. It's strange what happens to a family's finances when the person quietly covers the gaps, simply stops. Nothing dramatic. No announcement. The gaps just stayed gaps. Warren's furniture business, the one his grandfather started, the one that had never once in 14 years asked me directly for anything, started showing strain that people could actually see. Smaller orders. A line of credit that didn't get renewed as easily. Verity stopped telling the comfortable family story at dinners quite as often. I noticed. I didn't say anything about that either. Then, in March, Everett brought it up over dinner, careful, the way he is when he already knows the answer he's hoping for. Dad needs $85,000 before the refinancing deadline. Just if there's any way. There was a version of me, not that long ago, who would have wired it that night without telling anyone the number. I sat with my fork halfway to my plate and felt that old version of myself reach for the laptop before I'd even decided anything. I didn't reach for it. I can put together a loan, I said. A real one. With paperwork. With my name on it where everyone can see it. Everett blinked like I'd answered a different question than the one he'd asked. That's not really how we do things. I know, I said. That's the part I'm changing. I want to be honest with you. Some part of me wanted to say no completely, just to see what would happen if, for once, the family's comfort wasn't mine to manage. I didn't say no, but I didn't disappear quietly into the math either. That's not nothing. Some days, it felt like the bravest sentence I'd said in 14 years. 2 weeks later, an invitation arrived. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering. Whitfield Furniture. 50 years. A gala, downtown, the kind with a string quartet and a financial presentation for a prospective buyer who wanted the company's full books before signing anything. Verity was being honored that night as matriarch. Of course she was. My firm had been asked, weeks earlier, to help cross-reference the company's older records for the sale. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. Just paperwork. Just numbers. I didn't know yet that one of those old folders had a note in it I wasn't supposed to find. What I found inside didn't just clear my name. It exposed 9 years of strategy. The note was filed in the wrong folder. That's the only reason I found it. I was cross-referencing transfer records from 9 years back. Boring, technical work, the kind nobody reads twice, when I found a handwritten memo from Verity to Warren, tucked behind a receipt for catering deposits. Dated the week before my wedding. She has more than we do. Don't let Everett find out how much we need this marriage. I read it 3 times. Then I set it down on my desk very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid might still be hot. She'd known. Not suspected.
Known.
She'd found my grandmother's bank statement on our kitchen counter 9 years ago. The one I'd left out for 4 days. The one I'd assumed nobody had touched. And instead of saying anything, she'd built 14 years of a different story on top of it. The ballroom smelled like candle wax and warm bread. A string quartet was tuning somewhere near the back. I stood near a tall window with a glass of wine I didn't drink, watching Warren shake hands with a man in a gray suit, the buyer I assumed, the one whose due diligence had put that folder in my hands in the first place. The financial presentation went exactly as planned, right up until the part where it didn't. The buyer's lawyer asked, politely, about a discrepancy in the older transfer records, an unexplained $22,000 9 years back that had kept the company afloat through a loan default that should have ended it. My firm's report had already flagged it. I hadn't planned to be the one to say where it came from out loud. But Verity, 3 glasses of champagne in, laughed and said, lightly to the room, "Oh, we've always managed to take care of our own." I don't know what made me answer her. Maybe it was the casserole dish. Maybe it was 9 years. At that point, what would you have done? Stayed quiet again? Or finally said it out loud? That money was mine, I said. Not loud. Just clear enough to carry across a quiet room. The quartet kept playing. Nobody else did. For the first time in 14 years, the room adjusted around the truth, instead of around her version of it. Verity found me by the window a few minutes later, her voice pitched low. The way people get when they want a conversation to look smaller than it is. We were protecting Everett, she said. We didn't want him to feel like he needed saving. You didn't protect him, I said. You used me to protect yourselves. She shook her head, already reaching for the next version of the story. You don't understand what it's like, watching your son need things. I do, I said. I've been paying for them for 14 years. She went quiet at that. Just for a second. Long enough that I kept going. You never needed the world to believe I married for money, I said. You needed them to stop asking why you needed mine. Verity set her champagne glass down on the windowsill, very precisely, both hands suddenly looking older than I'd ever noticed them being. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just looked, for one unguarded second, like a woman watching a story she'd told for 9 years come apart in front of the one person who'd always known where the seams were. She didn't look humiliated. She looked exposed. Those aren't the same thing, and I never understood the difference until I watched it happen to her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell the room the rest of it. I finished my part of the financial summary for the buyer's lawyer, calmly, because it was, after everything, still just my job to be accurate. Then I found Everett near the bar and said the only thing that actually mattered. I'm done being your family's silent ledger, I told him. I'm still your wife. I'm just not your alibi anymore. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he nodded, slow, like a man finally doing the math on something he should have added up years ago. I drove home that night with the windows down, even though it was cold. I don't know why. It just felt like a night that needed air moving through it. It's a quiet Sunday morning now, months later. Coffee, my own kitchen, the good light that only shows up before 9. The folder isn't in a drawer anymore. It's not in a closet either. It sits in a slim file box on the shelf in my home office, next to my own firm's records, labeled in my own handwriting like it's nothing extraordinary. Because it isn't anymore. It used to mean a secret I had to manage. Now it just means a number that was always true, whether anyone chose to believe it or not. Everett and I are still married. Different, though. Quieter in some rooms. Plainer in others. He asks me things now instead of assuming them. I let him. Verity sends a card at Christmas. Correct. Distant. We have never spoken about that night again, and I suspect we never will. Some things don't get resolved. They just get accurate. And accuracy, I've learned, is its own kind of peace. I traded one kind of quiet for another. The first kind was hiding. This one is just being fully seen, which turns out to have its own particular loneliness. Smaller, but real. I chose it anyway. I wonder sometimes if being believed and being loved are the same thing. I don't think they are. But I have one of them now without having to earn it twice, and most days. That's enough. If you're the one in your family who quietly keeps the numbers from falling apart, the one nobody thanks, only suspects, I think you already know exactly what I'm describing. You don't need me to tell you the ending. You're living some version of it right now. If this felt uncomfortably familiar, subscribe. I tell stories about the quiet roles people push us into and what it costs to step out of them. And if you're ready for another one, watch the next story about what happened when I stopped fixing things completely.